Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. The topic of today's video is the faces of homelessness. Now before I get into this video, I would like to address some comments on my last video that was uploaded. And the comments basically insinuated that I could get in trouble with YouTube for bashing landlords. Now, I don't feel I bashed any landlords. I read some requirements of a landlord based on Pennsylvania guidelines, expectations, shall we say, of landlords. And I, in fact, was talking about some comments and concerns from a Facebook housing group where people stated issues and problems they had with landlords. Again, that is not bashing landlords. That is people merely stating the frustrations, for example, with having to pay for application fees. They're non-refundable. Criminal background checks, they're non-refundable. That can add up. That could run a person as much as $75, $80 before they even actually talk to a landlord. The issue with pets and pet deposits and pet fees was another concern. So was repairing. Now, I may occasionally share an experience with something, and in regards to landlords, I have court documents from the local magistrate's office in regards to my non-lease renewal hearing, and also with the security deposit issue. So I have paperwork to back up what I experienced and what the outcome was. I guess when it comes to the subject of slumlords, some people are very touchy about that, but I am sorry, but those type of people, I'm sorry about that, those type of people do take advantage of people during bad situations, and especially now, because of the housing shortage. And these people basically are at the mercy of rotten landlords who have all the rights, essentially, and people pretty much feel trapped because it's not so easy to get another place. If I had presented anything unfactual or misleading, I'm fairly certain that YouTube would have notified me in regards to my channel. So, while I appreciate the concern, again, I was not bashing any landlords. I was stating an experience that I have paperwork to back up what I was saying. And as far as slumlords, yes, there's several of them in Hazleton. And they seem to thrive and prosper. And I don't know why, but they do. Some of you are in a situation like that currently yourselves. So you know from where I speak how hard it is to get out of a situation like that, especially right now more than ever. So, I am sorry if some folks feel I am, bashing someone. Um, I don't use someone's full name. Now, if I use someone's full name and specifically talked about them, then I would probably get myself in some kind of issue. But again, not necessarily if I am telling the truth and I have paperwork to back up what I am saying. But I'm not going that route of calling someone out by their full name. There's no need for me to do so. As a matter of fact, if I was saying something offending, um, I am pretty sure my former landlord would contact me because guess what, guys? He's subscribed to my YouTube channel. And if I said anything unflattering about him or anything that was not accurate, he still very much could contact me possibly through, well, I have a new phone number now, but he could, in effect, contact me through a former tenant that I still talk to. So, I'm pretty confident if I'm going to start citing figures or facts, I'm going to make sure I double check them and try to get them from reliable websites and sources. I'm not pulling numbers out of my head or scenarios. So, with that being said, I know this is a topic that some people don't like to hear about and don't like to, be made aware of, but it is out there. And just because someone chooses not to see a situation doesn't mean that that situation does not, in fact, exist. If you're not in that situation, um, that's wonderful. And I'm happy for you. But for those of us who are in different levels and different degrees of housing situations, it's a little bit different story. And yeah, there is a growing problem here in the US and overseas as well. So, with that being said, let's get into my video. The website that I am using for my information is called the National Alliance to End Homelessness. The link to their website is in the description box. It's endhomelessness.org. And I'm drawing on an article called State of Homelessness 2021 edition. Here is a little statistic about Pennsylvania and homelessness. And this is from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Statewide in Pennsylvania, 13,512 people are homeless on any given night. The rate of homelessness is 11 homeless people per 10,000 people in the general population. The nation is currently facing one of the most severe housing crises in history. Not surprisingly, those living in poverty are the most significantly affected. In the 1970s, communities had plenty of affordable housing. That meant that when a family or individual experienced a crisis and lost housing, they could quickly find another place to live. But by the mid-1980s, the supply of low-cost housing had shrunk significantly. Since then, rents have continued to rise, and lower-income people in particular have experienced slow or stagnant wage growth. Today, 8 million extremely low-income households pay at least half, 50%, of their income toward housing, putting them at risk of housing instability and homelessness. The solution to homelessness is straightforward: housing. By connecting people who are experiencing homelessness to housing and services, they have a platform from which they can address other areas that may have contributed to their homelessness, such as employment, health, and substance abuse. There are two homelessness-focused housing models that have been demonstrated to effectively end homelessness. They are: one, permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing pairs long-term rental assistance with supportive services. It's targeted to individuals and families with chronic illnesses, disabilities, mental health issues, or substance use disorders. For those who have experienced long-term or repeated homelessness. Rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing provides short-term rental assistance and services. The goals are to help people obtain housing quickly, increase self-sufficiency, and stay housed. Administered by HUD, public housing and voucher programs provide decent and safe affordable housing for low-income people and play a critical role in reducing homelessness. Housing Choice Voucher Program, or commonly known as Section 8. And then there is public housing. I want to talk about Section 8 for a moment because in Pennsylvania, More and more these new owners and landlords are choosing not to accept Section 8 because they are limited to how much they can raise the rent and how often they can raise it. Whereas by not accepting Section 8, they can be free to choose a rent that they feel is satisfactory, not what the government is telling them they can set it at. So Section 8 is not as popular as it used to be, and there's quite a few people with vouchers in Pennsylvania looking for housing and not being able to find it. So I don't know what HUD plans to do with that, but I do think HUD needs to realize and address the fact that they may need to incorporate something else long term besides Section 8, because newer landlords and corporate landlords do not deal with Section 8. As I said, I have seen in real estate groups countless people, families, single people, elderly, looking for units accepting Section 8, and they're getting fewer and fewer accepting it. So where that once was a very popular program, it no longer is, and mainly because of the rules, and mainly because of money, how much rent they can legally charge and how they can raise it. Health and homelessness are inextricably linked. Health problems can cause a person's homelessness as well as be exacerbated by the experience. An acute physical or behavioral crisis or any long-term disabling condition can lead to homelessness. Homelessness itself can exacerbate chronic medical conditions. A person can become chronically homeless when his or her health condition becomes disabling and stable housing is too difficult to maintain without help. According to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, people living in shelters are more than twice as likely to have a disability compared to the general population. On a given night in 2017, 20% of the homeless population reported having a serious mental illness, 16% conditions related to chronic substance abuse, and more than 10,000 people had HIV/AIDS. Conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, and HIV/AIDS are found at high rates among the homeless population, sometimes 3 to 6 times higher than that of the general population. People who have mental health and substance use disorders and who are homeless are more likely to have immediate life-threatening physical illnesses and live in dangerous conditions. Also, more than 10% of people who seek substance abuse or mental health treatment in their public health system are homeless. The issue of opioid abuse has risen to a level of national crisis as the number of people abusing prescription drugs and heroin has dramatically risen, and the rate of opioid-related overdose deaths has tripled since 2000. Substance abuse disorders are a known risk factor for homelessness, and substance abuse and overdose disproportionately impact homeless people. Treatment and preventative care can be difficult to access for people who are experiencing homelessness, so often because they lack insurance or have difficulty engaging healthcare providers in the community. While housing is a platform, people with a substance abuse disorder who are experiencing homelessness have the opportunity to engage in treatment fully without the additional stress of living on the streets. Housing stability is a key contributor to long-term recovery and reduces relapse for people who are homeless. Well, that is pretty self-explanatory. For chronically homeless people, the intervention of permanent supportive housing provides stable housing coupled with supportive services as needed. A cost-effective solution to homelessness for those with the most severe health, mental health, and substance abuse challenges. Domestic violence and homelessness. A domestic violence experience is common among youth, single adults, and families who become homeless. For many, it is the immediate cause of their homelessness. Survivors of domestic violence may turn to homeless service programs seeking a safe place to stay after fleeing an abusive relationship. Others may turn to homeless service programs primarily because they lack the economic resources to secure or maintain housing after leaving an abusive relationship. On a single night in 2019, homeless services providers had more than 48,000 beds set aside for survivors of domestic violence. The immediate need of a survivor fleeing domestic violence is safety. Some survivors may not be able to stay safely in their own home, and with some additional financial support, the rental assistance may be able to, transition to safe housing. Others may require a stay in the emergency shelter or transitional program before re-entering their own independent housing. Shorter long-term rental assistance can be used to help survivors exit shelter and regain housing. Having an affordable place to call home is crucial for this population to both reduce their risk of homelessness as well as the possibility of future violence. Research indicates that families receiving a housing subsidy after exiting homelessness are far less likely to experience interpersonal violence than those that do not. Beyond addressing their immediate safety and housing needs, survivors of domestic violence require supportive services that can help them heal from the trauma of abuse and improve their economic security and mental well-being. Poverty, and particularly deep poverty, is a strong predictor of homelessness. Black and Latino groups are overrepresented in poverty relative to the representation in the overall population, and are most likely to live in deep poverty with rates of 10.8% and 7.6% respectively. Systemic housing discrimination, supported by the federal government decades ago, is the root cause of the current wealth gap between white households and households of color. Redlining discouraged economic investments such as mortgage and business loans in black and brown neighborhoods. African Americans still live disproportionately in concentrated poverty or in neighborhoods where they are regularly exposed to environmental toxins, have limited access to quality care services, nutritious food, and economic opportunities. People that become homeless are likely to have lived in these types of neighborhoods. For most minority groups that transition to neighborhoods with less crime, no environmental hazards, and close proximity to services are often met with challenges. White people, on the other hand, were frequently offered lower rents, deposits, and other moving costs were also quoted as negotiable, making it easier for white people to secure units. Incarceration. The racial disparity in incarceration rates has continuously worsened. The rate for African Americans had tripled between 1968 and 2016 and is more than 6 times the rate of white incarceration. These racial disparities are no accident. Black and brown people are at far greater risk of being targeted, profiled, and arrested for minor offenses, especially in high poverty areas. The implications of overcriminalization are far-reaching. Criminal history can keep people from successfully passing background checks to secure both housing and employment. People exiting jails and prisons, not jobs. People exiting jails and prisons often face significant problems in accessing safe and affordable housing, and the rate of homelessness is high. People of color are far more likely to lack health insurance than white people, especially in states without Medicaid expansion. Even with expansion, overall, about 30 million people are uninsured, with about half of them being people of color. The lack of health insurance for people with chronic medical conditions and are untreated serious mental illness can place them at risk of becoming homeless or being precariously housed. An effort to end homelessness in the United States must address the range of issues that have resulted from racial inequity. This includes assuring affordable, stable housing for all systems, programs, and individuals that serve people experiencing homelessness should monitor their outcomes in order to eliminate disparities in the way that they provide services. In January 2020, there were 580,466 people experiencing homelessness in America. Most were individuals, 70%, and the rest were people living in families with children. They lived in every state and territory, and they reflected the diversity of our country. People experiencing chronic homelessness belong to another group that are often singled out for attention. These individuals have disabilities and have been continuously homeless for at least a year or experienced homelessness at least 3 to 4 times in the last 3 years. Chronically homeless individuals are currently 19% of the homeless population. Veterans are another analyzed category separate from a larger group. They represent 6% of people experiencing homelessness. Interestingly enough, according to the statistics, they state that males represent a higher homeless population than do females. Yet, I've seen when it comes to, in terms of poverty, I've seen where women experience more rates of poverty, higher rates of it, than men. So that discrepancy right there really caught my eye. I want to talk a moment about unsheltered homelessness. There is a difference between sheltered and unsheltered. Unsheltered homelessness is people who, for example, sleep on subways, trains, sidewalks, vehicles, or parks. These are the most vulnerable category because they essentially are exposed to the elements and open to crime more so than sheltered homeless people. In theory, sheltered homeless people are people who are either staying with a friend or family member in a hotel, in a transitional shelter, or some type of transitional housing. They are not considered as vulnerable as the unsheltered homeless, obviously, because they are out of the elements. They may not necessarily be safer, but the fact that they are not sleeping in the elements or sleeping rough, they are considered less vulnerable. The COVID pandemic has also brought about some of this homelessness too, with people who lost their jobs, weren't able to pay their rent or keep up with their rent or their mortgage. The pandemic really exacerbated a trend that was already starting of rents increasing and housing stock shrinking. 2009 and 2020, nationwide homelessness increased by over 2%. The change marks the fourth straight year that incremental population growth. Previously, there had been a decline, decreasing in 8 of the 9 years before the current upward trend began. While overall progress to end homelessness has been modest, there is significant variation among subgroups. Veterans, it says here, are a good example. 82 communities in 3 states have announced that they ended veterans' homelessness, meaning that systems can ensure that homelessness is rare, brief, and one time. While real progress has occurred for populations such as veterans, others have been left behind, primarily individual adults. The number of individuals experiencing homelessness has remained static over time, decreasing by a mere 1% between 2007 and 2020. Previous gains made by chronically homeless individuals have been quickly ending. Unsheltered homelessness is on the rise. Since data on homelessness has been collected, unsheltered homelessness had largely trended downward. By 2015, it dropped by nearly a third. However, over the last 5 years, there's been a reversal of that trend. The unsheltered population has surged by 30%, and this is growing. nearly wiping out a decade of previous gains. The number of people currently living unsheltered is virtually as high as it was in 2007, and to be quite honest, a truly reflective number of homeless people is often hard to actually gather, as again, it is hard to calculate the number of sheltered homeless versus unsheltered homeless and have a really accurate an accurate figure. So most states assume that their homelessness rates are actually higher. They know there are people that are hidden homeless that may stay with family, friends, hotels, etc., in and out of shelters, but not necessarily accounted for because there's gaps in where they are staying. So it's safe to assume that any state statistics and figures are actually higher than what they have record of. The CARES Act of 2020 and the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, Congress invested billions of new dollars in programs that should impact the number of people and families in permanent housing. Most notably, they appropriated $4 billion for the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, $5 billion for emergency housing vouchers, and $5 billion for the home program, rental assistance, affordable housing development, and other services. Thus, permanent housing placements should be continuing on an upward trajectory in 2020, 2021, and possibly beyond. Nationally, the most common forms of homeless assistance are permanent supportive housing and emergency shelter. Only one type of transit or intervention has been on the decline, and that is transitional housing. There are 56% fewer beds in this category than there were in 2007. This shift is responsible for decreases in the overall availability of temporary housing in recent years. It further reflects the policy's goals of moving more people into permanent housing as quickly as possible. Indicators of risk. People living in poverty account for nearly 34 million people, or 10.5% of the U.S. population. As a result, they struggle to afford necessities such as housing. In 2019, 6.3 million American households experienced severe housing cost burden, which means they spent more than 50% of their total income on housing. This marked the fifth straight year of decreases in the size of this group. However, the number of severely cost-burdened American households is still 10% higher than it was in 2007, the year the nation began monitoring homelessness data. Doubling up or sharing the house for economic reasons is another measure of housing hardship. In 2019, an estimated 37 million people were in this situation. Some doubled up people and families have fragile relationships with their hosts or face other challenges in the home, putting them at risk of homelessness. Over the last 6 years, the number of doubled up people has been trending downward, but is still 3% higher than in 2007. Even before the pandemic, there was significant variation among states in their data on people at risk of homelessness. National level data, which has been discouraging, can mask even more dire challenges in specific areas of the country. For example, since 2007, severe housing cost burden households grew by 35% in Hawaii and 36% in Connecticut, numbers that are even higher than national level growth in these areas. Similarly, over that same time period, number of people doubled up expanded by 102% in Idaho and 65% in Florida. Complicated matters further, the impacts of the current recession and responsive policies have varied across the country as well. Regional differences in at-risk housing factors can be shifting, and they can be challenging. So your head may be spinning from all of these statistics and such, but let's be honest. We all know homeless people. We all may have experienced it at some point in our lives, maybe more than once. Many of us know from experience what it feels like. There are subcategories within subcategories. It can get very, very defined, the criteria for classifying homeless people. But the bottom line is there's a housing crisis. People's incomes, especially on fixed incomes, their income has not been able to keep up with the housing costs. And this is a big problem right now in the US, and it's growing. The eviction moratorium contribute to this as well. Now, there was aid out there for renters and some landlords, and I have read online many different sites talking about how only a small percentage of that aid has actually gone to tenants and landlords, with much of it being tied up with, I guess, agencies and paperwork. That's really sad, and I am sure that's frustrating for both landlords and tenants who desperately do need the help or, qualified to receive it and yet have it because of paperwork or red tape, etc. Now, one of my subs had mentioned about tiny homes. And yes, there is tiny home communities in some states, and that is one possible solution to help out with housing for people. Another solution would be fixing up abandoned properties, properties that have fallen on neglect, share sales, property like that, empty malls, empty businesses. Um, it just seems so darn infuriating at times to go through an area, see empty stores, empty storefronts, empty malls, and know that there is a high percentage of homeless in that area, and there's all these buildings sitting around empty doing absolutely nothing. And it makes one wonder, well, why don't some communities look into, having people maybe help fix some of these businesses up and sort of with like a Habitat to Humanity approach, work towards remodeling or building their own apartment or so and taking a hands-on approach into it. That could be one possible way. Again, though, that takes money as well. It's going to take some type of financial investment to end a majority of homelessness. There's always going to be homeless people. So, in closing, I just want to say that the myths about homelessness are not always true. There is always a small group of people who do enjoy living on the fringe, living outdoors. They are the exception, not the rule. Most people would trade their own bed, hot water, and clean clothes any day, being able to sit and watch TV, etc., over living in a tent or sleeping in their car. I know, I miss sleeping in my own bed every single day so far for the past several months. It is what it is. But the majority of people do not intentionally make themselves homeless, and they certainly do not enjoy being homeless. Again, the myth that all homeless people make bad choices and bring it on themselves, drugs and alcohol, or not paying their rent, hence why they are homeless, is a myth as well, because there's growing populations of people who are priced out of housing, people who have lost their homes because of properties being sold, not being able to meet the higher rents. That's not because of a bad choice or a bad habit that people have. That is decisions that were made that they had no control over, and so people find themselves in those situations. Another myth is that people become homeless because they have mental health issues and therefore, they cannot cope being on their own per se and become chronically homeless. That is a myth to a point as well. If the United States treated mental health issues with more funding, and there still wasn't stigma attached with people having mental health issues, um, more people would be able to live independently. The problem is that mental health services vary by state. Some states may have great mental health resources, other states are sadly lacking, and so it's very disproportionate. Um, if people are offered good treatment and affordable treatment, oftentimes they can and do quite well at living on their own. First, we need to eliminate the stigma attached to having mental health issues. And then second, we need to have better medical care and coverage for mental health issues as well. I can say from experience that losing your home, even if you just rent it, is a really heartbreaking thing to experience it. You lose your memories, you lose your comfort zone, you lose your privacy, you lose your identity almost. And it is serving no one's good to make housing so unaffordable for a majority of the working population. All it's going to do down the road is create more problems than what are already existing. Now, I know there's factors such as taxes, um, the cost of materials, which contribute to rent increases as well. It's a crisis, and I don't think there's any one simple solution for it. It's a crisis that needs to be approached from many different angles, and literally for each person needs to be handled on an individual basis. 5 different homeless people will have 5 different stories. No one's, no two people's situation is alike. And just what makes it so sad about most of it is there should not be families with children living in their cars, living on the street. There shouldn't be veterans living on the street. There shouldn't be elderly living on the street. I find it hard to believe that our government wasn't aware that over so many years an elderly population was going to continue to grow. People were living a little bit longer life expectancy. Therefore, there might have been an increased demand for low income and disabled housing. So why act surprised now if you knew about the coming problem but failed to act on it in a timely fashion years ago? Um, I don't know, guys. It is a heck of a mess. It truly, truly is. And unfortunately, there just is not enough funding to help everyone who truly needs it. So sometimes people just have to do what they have to do and try to figure things out on their own. I want to add, I think part of the problem also in regards to homelessness is the United States' desire to criminalize everything. Same with drug addiction. The United States just loves to criminalize everything. Down the road, I would love to do a video about Portugal and their dramatic turnaround with drug addiction. Very interesting. My son Bobby actually told me about it about 2 years ago. And as amazing as the numbers are, with how Portugal was able to turn around their high rates of addiction and crime, um, you know, here in the US, we realized that using that approach would not work. Why? Because there's too much money to be made in people's misery. Everything from drug and alcohol treatment, inpatient, outpatient, adult probation, adult parole services, jails, prisons, um, halfway houses, etc., are all money making, I want to say, institutions. And so, therefore, the United States, in a way, does profit from people's misery. Um, the more things are criminalized and people get sucked into the criminal system, the more money there is to be made off of them and off of their situation. So, yes, United States loves to criminalize things. And in regards to homelessness, yes, you've seen videos all over YouTube of homeless camps being destroyed and people's belongings being destroyed, and people may get arrested for being where they are, but that does not solve the problem. They're just going to move on to a different area and take up residence somewhere else. It doesn't eliminate the problem. The problem is there is nowhere for them to go. Removing them from your neighborhood because they're causing your property values to depreciate, so just haul them all away, gets them out of your sight, but they're still there. They're going to be someone else's problem, but those people are still there. And unfortunately, a lot of communities have that mentality and approach rather than address the actual problem, which is, why are there so many families homeless in our town? Why are there so many seniors homeless in our town? Or why is there so many homeless addicts in our town? Let's do some studies. Let's get out on the street. Let's find out with these people what is going on. And until the day that the United States actually takes a hands-on approach and deals with people individually, as everyone's story is uniquely their own, this crisis is going to get so much worse, so much worse. And as I said in my last video, it's a shame that housing, which I've always thought of as a necessity, especially in a state like Pennsylvania during the winter, right now housing is a luxury. And as a luxury, many people cannot afford it. And that is really, really sad. Will it turn around? I honestly don't know. I don't even want to go on that because I honestly can't say. I truly cannot say. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it ever gets better. Um, some communities may find the situation to be so out of hand that, yeah, they're forced to do something, anything, even if it's put people in hotels, something. Crime is going to get crazily out of hand in some communities, and it's going to become an issue of people's safety and welfare and just being able to walk or drive down the street. So, with that being said, guys, if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. If you haven't already, hit my subscribe button, and please hit that bell so you are notified every time I do upload a new video. Please take care and stay safe, and I will see you all on my next one. Good night.